Excuse me, officer. I believe there's been a misunderstanding.
One sentence. Polite, calm, respectful. The cop didn't even blink.
Veteran, you?
He laughed so loud it echoed off the pavement.
That's the funniest thing I've heard all week.
He stepped closer.
You look like every thug I've ever booked. Broke, dirty, full of lies.
He shoved Harold's ID back at his chest.
Shut your mouth and get on the ground before I put you there myself.
A woman across the street hit a record. A couple on the sidewalk snickered. A passing driver slowed down to watch. Nobody stepped forward. Not one. But none of them knew what was coming. Because what happened next didn't just silence that officer. It destroyed his entire career. Harold Turner woke the same way he had every morning for the past 30 years. Eyes open at 5:15. No alarm. No snooze button. Just a quiet internal clock that the Army had wound tight decades ago and never let go. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. The house was still. Morning light crept through thin curtains and fell across the wooden floor in pale golden strips. The room smelled like old pine and coffee grounds left over from yesterday's pot. It was a small house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a table big enough for 2. Nothing fancy, nothing broken either. Everything in its place. Bed made tight enough to bounce a quarter off. Shoes lined up by the door. Jackets hung in order on the rack. Harold didn't believe in clutter. The military taught him that. 28 years in the United States Army. 3 combat tours. Special Forces. Green Beret. The kind of service most people only read about in books or watched in movies. But Harold never talked about it unless someone asked. And even then, he kept it short. In the living room, a folded American flag sat inside a shadow box on the wall. Next to it hung a framed photograph, a unit photo from his second tour. 12 men in desert fatigues, squinting against the Afghan sun. Harold stood second from the left, 30 pounds lighter and 20 years younger, with the same steady eyes he carried today. On the shelf below sat a silver star and a velvet case, a purple heart beside it. And next to those, 3 community service awards from the city of Charlotte. Harold had earned every one of them. But if you walked into this house, you wouldn't know the man who lived here was decorated. You'd just think he was tidy. He poured his coffee into the same chipped mug he'd used for a decade. Black, no sugar. He stood at the kitchen window and watched the street wake up. A neighbor's dog barked twice. A school bus rumbled past, brakes squealing at the corner. The oak tree in the front yard still held its leaves, though the edges had started turning gold. Harold ran a nonprofit called Veterans Bridge Foundation. He'd started it 5 years ago out of his garage, with nothing but a folding table and a list of names. Homeless veterans. Men and women who'd served their country and come home to nothing. No job, no roof. No one cared enough to make a phone call on their behalf. Now the foundation had a small office downtown, 2 full-time staff, and partnerships with shelters across the county. Harold drove there 3 times a week. Today was one of those days. He grabbed his keys, locked the front door, and walked to his truck. A 2011 Ford F-150, faded blue paint, a dent on the rear bumper from a parking lot mishap he never bothered fixing. On the back window, a single decal, the Veterans Bridge Foundation logo. He could have driven something nicer. The foundation paid him a modest salary. He had savings from nearly 3 decades of military pay. But Harold liked this truck. It reminded him of the old deuce-and-a-half he drove across the desert in Afghanistan. rough, reliable, and honest. He picked up his son Elijah on the way. 28 years old, a middle school teacher with a quick smile and a sharp tongue. Elijah slid into the passenger seat and immediately shook his head. "Dad, I'm begging you. Let this truck die in peace," Harold smiled. "She runs fine." "She runs loud. There's a difference." They laughed. It was easy between them. Always had been. Elijah had his mother's warmth and his father's discipline, and he wore both well. The drive took them east through the city, first through their own neighborhood, small houses, chain-link fences, kids waiting at bus stops. Then past the commercial strip, gas stations, a laundromat, a barber shop Harold had been going to for 15 years. And then the road changed. The houses got bigger. The lawns got wider. The fences turned to stone walls and iron gates. The sidewalks were clean. The cars in the driveways cost more than Harold's annual salary. Harold drove this route 3 times a week. Same road, same speed. Never once had a problem. But today, parked in a speed trap turnout just past the subdivision entrance, a patrol car sat idling in the shade. Behind the wheel, Officer Craig Dutton leaned back in his seat. Late 30s, mirrored sunglasses, second cup of gas station coffee going cold in the holder. Dutton had been with the department for 11 years. In that time, 4 separate complaints had been filed against him for racial bias during traffic stops. Every single one came back unsubstantiated. The department had a pattern of looking the other way, and Dutton had a pattern of finding reasons to pull over drivers who looked like Harold. He watched the old blue Ford roll past, looked at the truck, looked at the driver, made a decision. The blue lights came on. Harold saw the lights in his rear-view mirror before he heard the short blast of the siren, blue and red, flashing hard against the morning sun. His hands stayed exactly where they were, 10 and 2, steady. "Dad?" Elijah sat up straight in the passenger seat. His voice was calm, but his jaw had tightened. "Hands where he can see them," Harold said quietly. "On the dash. Don't move fast. Don't say anything sharp. We're fine." It wasn't the first time Harold had said those words. It wasn't the first time he'd had to. He signaled right, eased the truck to the shoulder, and brought it to a full stop. Engine off, window down, both hands back on the wheel. He could hear the patrol car door open behind him. Boots on asphalt. Slow, deliberate steps. The kind of walk that said, "I'm in no rush, and you're not going anywhere." Officer Craig Dutton appeared at the driver's side window. He didn't lean down right away. He stood there for a moment, looking at the truck, looking at the decal on the back window. Then he tilted his sunglasses down and looked at Harold. "License and registration." No good morning, no sir, just the flat, dry tone of a man who had already decided what this stop was going to be. Harold nodded once. "My license is in my back pocket. Registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them now." He moved slowly, deliberately, every motion announced in advance, like a man disarming a bomb. Because in moments like this, for men who looked like Harold, that's exactly what it felt like. He handed both documents through the window. Dutton took them without a word. He studied for the license for a long time. Too long. Then he looked at Harold again, then back at the license, then at the truck. "This is your vehicle?" "Yes, sir." "Where'd you get it?" Harold paused, not because the question was hard, because of what it implied. "Bought it," 6 years ago, from a dealership on West Boulevard. Dutton didn't write anything down. He just stared. You know why I stopped you? No, sir. You rolled through a stop sign 2 blocks back. Harold took a slow breath. With respect, officer, I made a complete stop. I'm certain of it. From the passenger seat, Elijah spoke up. He did stop. I was watching. Dutton didn't look at Elijah, didn't acknowledge him, didn't even turn his head. It was as if the young man hadn't spoken at all. He kept his eyes locked on Harold. Step out of the vehicle. Harold's fingers tightened around the steering wheel for just a second. Then he released them. Am I being detained, officer? Dutton's jaw shifted. I said, step out. I'd just like to understand. I'm not asking again. Harold held his gaze for a beat. Then he unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door slowly, and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. The morning air hit his face, cool, damp. It smelled like fresh-cut grass from the subdivision across the road, someone's sprinkler system hissing softly in the background. He stood still, hands at his sides, jacket zipped halfway, jeans, work boots. Nothing remarkable, nothing threatening. Just a man standing on the side of a road he drove 3 times a week. Dutton circled him like a dog sizing up something it didn't trust. He looked at Harold's boots, his jacket, his hands. He leaned sideways to peer into the truck through the open door. Then his eyes caught the decal on the rear window. Veterans Bridge Foundation. A small logo, an American flag wrapped around a bridge. What's that? Dutton nodded toward the back. My nonprofit. We help homeless veterans find housing and employment. Dutton's eyebrows went up. Not in admiration, in amusement. You run a veterans organization? Yes, sir. So what? You're a veteran? 28 years, United States Army. The laugh came before Harold even finished the sentence. Loud, sharp. The kind of laugh that wasn't meant to be funny. It was meant to cut. You? A veteran? Dutton shook his head, grinning. Yeah, I've heard that one before. Every guy I pull over's got a story. Last week it was a doctor. Week before that, a lawyer. He leaned in close enough that Harold could smell the stale coffee on his breath. You people always got a card to play. You people. The words hung in the air like smoke. Harold didn't blink, didn't flinch. His face was perfectly still, but behind his eyes something shifted, something deep and old and tired. Elijah's hand moved slowly inside the truck. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, tilted it toward the open window, low and steady. He pressed record. The red dot blinked on the screen. Dutton walked back to his cruiser, Harold's license still in his hand. He called in the plates. Harold stood alone on the shoulder, hands clasped in front of him like a man standing at attention. An old habit, the kind you don't unlearn. A jogger passed on the other side of the road. She glanced over, looked at the cop car, looked at Harold, kept running. A silver SUV slowed down. The driver, a white man in a golf shirt, stared for a few seconds through tinted windows. Then he drove on. No one stopped. No one asked if everything was okay. The radio in Dutton's cruiser crackled. The plates came back clean. Registration matched. No warrants, no flags, no record of any kind. A completely clean result. Any reasonable officer would have handed back the documents, maybe written a warning, and sent Harold on his way. That's what training is said to do. That's what the law required. Dutton walked back to the truck. "All right, plates are clean." He said it like he was disappointed, like he'd been hoping for something, anything, to justify what he was already planning to do. He leaned against the truck bed and crossed his arms. His eyes swept the inside of the cab through the back window. Then he sniffed. Loud, deliberate, theatrical. "What's that smell?" Harold turned slowly. "Excuse me?" "I smell something. Something coming from inside this vehicle." Dutton pushed off the truck and walked to the driver's side door. He leaned in, nose first, and sniffed again. "Yeah, there's definitely something in here." Harold's voice stayed level, but his eyes had changed. They were harder now, focused. He knew exactly what was happening. He'd seen it before, read about it, warned other men about it. "Officer, there is nothing illegal in my vehicle." "Well, I think there is." "I do not consent to a search." Dutton smiled. It was the kind of smile that had no warmth in it at all, like a door closing. "I don't need your consent. I have probable cause." He pointed at the truck. "That smell is my probable cause. Now step aside." Harold didn't move for a moment. His chest rose and fell once. Slow, controlled. Then he stepped back. Dutton opened the driver's door wide. He started with the center console, opened it, rifled through it. Napkins, a pen, a phone charger. He tossed them onto the seat. He moved to the glove box, pulled out a stack of papers. VA, medical documents, donor receipts for the foundation, an insurance card. He barely glanced at them before dropping them on the floor mat. Under the passenger seat, he found a worn leather Bible. He pulled it out, flipped through the pages like he was checking for contraband, and tossed it onto the dash. Elijah watched from outside the truck now. Dutton had ordered him out moments earlier with a single flat command. "You two, out. Hands where I can see them." Elijah stood 3 feet from his father, phone still recording in his jacket pocket, the lens just barely visible through the open zipper. Then Dutton reached under the back seat. His hand found something solid, metal. He pulled it out. A locked steel case, gray, about 12 inches long, the kind used for storing a handgun. Dutton held it up like a trophy. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Harold spoke immediately, clear, practiced. "That is a legally registered firearm. I have a valid concealed carry permit. It's in my wallet. I can show it to you right now." Dutton's whole body changed. His hand dropped to his holster. His stance widened. His voice went low and cold. "Get on the ground." "Officer, I just told you." "I said get on the ground. Now." "I am not resisting. I have a legal—" "On the ground." Harold looked at his son. Elijah's eyes were wide, his lips pressed tight. Harold gave him the smallest nod. It said, "Don't move." It said, "Stay calm." It said, "I've been here before." Then Harold Turner, Silver Star recipient, Purple Heart veteran, 3-tour combat soldier, slowly lowered himself to the gravel on the side of a road in the country he'd bled for. His knees hit first, then his palms, then his chest. The small stones pressed into his skin through his shirt. The ground was cold and damp. He could feel the vibration of a passing truck through the earth beneath him. He turned his face to the side. His cheek rested against the gravel, and from that angle, he could see his son standing frozen, tears running silently down his face, hands shaking at his sides. Harold closed his eyes, not in defeat, in control. Because if he lost his composure now, even for a second, this could end in a way no metal could fix. Dutton stood over Harold like a man admiring his own work. Legs apart, arms crossed. That same dead smile still sitting on his face, like it had been carved there. He looked down at the man on the ground the way someone looks at trash that blew into their yard. "Now," he said slowly, "that wasn't so hard, was it?" Harold said nothing. His palms were flat against the gravel. Small stones bit into his skin. His breathing was slow and steady. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. A rhythm he'd learned in the mountains of Afghanistan when bullets cracked the air above his head. He never thought he'd use it on American soil. Not like this. Dutton crouched down beside him, close enough that Harold could hear the leather of his belt creak, close enough to smell the cheap coffee and spearmint gum. "Here's what's going to happen," Dutton said. "I'm going to run that firearm. I'm going to check every serial number on that case, and if anything comes back wrong, you're going to jail today." He paused. "And honestly, even if it comes back clean, I'm not sure I believe a word out of your mouth." Harold kept his eyes on the ground. A line of ants marched along a crack in the asphalt 6 inches from his face. Tiny, determined, going somewhere with purpose. He focused on them. It was easier than focusing on the boot planted next to his head. Dutton stood back up. He pulled out his radio and called in the firearm's serial number. While he waited, he paced around the truck again, opening doors, checking under seats a second time, slamming the tailgate down and rummaging through a box of donated jackets Harold was bringing to the foundation. He held up a winter coat like it was evidence. "What's all this? You selling stolen goods out of this truck?" "Those are donations," Harold said from the ground, "for homeless veterans." Dutton dropped the coat in the dirt. "Sure they are." The radio crackled. The serial number came back clean, registered, legal, matching Harold's concealed carry permit exactly. Dutton stared at his radio for a long moment. His jaw worked back and forth like he was chewing on something bitter. A clean result. Again. Everything about this man was checking out, and it was making Dutton angrier, not calmer. He walked back to Harold. "All right, get up." Harold rose slowly. Gravel stuck to his shirt, his palms, the side of his face. He brushed himself off without a word. His eyes found Elijah. The young man was standing perfectly still near the passenger door, arms stiff at his sides. His phone was still recording, the small lens peeking through his jacket zipper like a quiet witness. Dutton wasn't done. "So you say you're a veteran?" He leaned against the cruiser and folded his arms. "What branch?" "Army." "What unit?" 3rd Special Forces Group, Fort Bragg." "How long?" 28 years. Dutton tilted his head. 28 years in Special Forces? He let out a short breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh, but close enough. "You expect me to believe that a guy driving this piece of junk truck was in the Green Berets?" Harold's voice didn't waver. "I don't expect you to believe anything, officer. I'm telling you the truth." "Yeah, well, truth is funny." Dutton pushed off the car and walked a slow circle around Harold. Like a predator. Like a man enjoying himself. "Because I've been doing this a long time, and I can tell when someone's full of it." He stopped directly in front of Harold, eye to eye. "You got any proof? Huh? Anything besides that little card you probably bought online for $10? Harold reached slowly into his back pocket. He pulled out his VA identification card, dark blue, official seal, his photo, his name, his branch of service. Dutton took it, looked at it for maybe 3 seconds. Then he flicked it back at Harold's chest like a playing card. It bounced off and landed on the ground between them. Anyone can fake an ID. Something moved behind Harold's eyes, a flash of heat, quick, controlled, then gone. He bent down, picked up the card, and put it back in his pocket without a word. From across the road, a man had stopped mowing his lawn. He stood at the edge of his driveway, arms resting on the mower handle, watching the whole thing. He didn't come closer, didn't call out, just watched, like it was television. A second patrol car pulled into the shoulder behind Dutton's cruiser. The door opened, and Sergeant Brenda Moss stepped out. Mid-40s, hair pulled back, expression unreadable. Dutton waved her over. "Got a suspicious individual here, claims to be a veteran. Found a firearm in the vehicle." Moss looked at Harold, then at Elijah, then at the truck. Doors open, contents scattered, donated coats lying in the dirt. Her eyes lingered on the gravel marks pressed into Harold's shirt. "The firearm registered?" she asked. "Yeah," Dutton said, like it was a technicality. "Concealed carry permit?" "He showed me something. Could be fake." Moss looked at Harold again. He stood still, hands at his sides, back straight, chin level. If she'd spent even one day around military personnel, she would have recognized that posture instantly. It was the posture of a man who had stood at attention more times than he could count. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then looked away. She said nothing. Dutton took that silence as permission. He turned back to Harold with a new energy, bolder now, like he'd just been handed backup and a blank check. "All right, here's what I think." He held up a finger with each point, like a man counting crimes. "I think that ID is fake. I think this nonprofit is a scam. I think you found that gun somewhere, or worse. And I think you and your boy here were up to no good in this neighborhood." Harold's voice came back low and even. "None of that is true." "Then you won't mind coming down to the station. We'll sort it all out there." "On what charge?" Dutton smiled. "Obstruction? Resisting? I'll figure it out." Elijah couldn't hold it any longer. He stepped forward. His voice cracked with the effort of staying respectful while his whole body trembled. "Sir, my father served this country for almost 30 years. He has a silver star, a Purple Heart. He has given everything to—" Dutton turned on him like a switch had been flipped. "One more word." He pointed a finger an inch from Elijah's face. "One more word. And you're going in cuffs too. You understand me?" Elijah froze. His lips pressed shut. His nostrils flared. His eyes burned. But he didn't speak. He stepped back, because his father had taught him that sometimes silence is the only armor you've got, even when your blood is screaming. Moss shifted her weight. She uncrossed her arms. She looked at the ground, then at the sky, then at Dutton. "Craig," she said quietly, "maybe we should just—" "I got this." Dutton didn't even let her finish. He waved her off the way you'd wave off a fly. "Go wait by your car." Moss stood still for a moment. Her mouth tightened. Then she turned and walked back to her cruiser. She sat in the driver's seat with the door open. She could see everything. She could hear everything. And she did nothing. The man across the street had gone back inside. The lawnmower sat idle in the driveway. The sprinklers hissed. A school bus passed, and the kids inside pressed their faces against the windows, staring at the flashing lights like it was a show. Harold stood on that shoulder with gravel dust on his clothes and his VA card in his pocket, and his son's tears drying in the morning air. He had fought in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. He had held dying soldiers in his arms. He had been shot at, blown up, and put back together with metal and thread. And now he stood on a roadside in his own country, being told he was a liar by a man who had never sacrificed a single thing. The morning sun climbed higher. The shadows shrank, and Harold Turner stood perfectly still, waiting for what came next. He already knew what he was going to do. He'd known since the moment that officer laughed in his face. He just needed the right moment, and it was almost here. Dutton reached for his handcuffs. The metal clinked against his belt. A small sound, but in the silence of that roadside, it rang out like a hammer on steel. "Turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back." Harold didn't turn around. He didn't raise his voice, didn't step back, didn't clench his fists. He just stood there, feet planted, spine straight, eyes locked on Dutton with the kind of stillness that only comes from a man who has stared down things far more dangerous than a badge. "Officer," Harold said. His voice was low, quiet, but every word landed with weight. "You said anyone can fake an ID. Fair enough." He paused. "But you can't fake this." Harold reached for his left sleeve. Slowly, the way he did everything. Announced, deliberate, controlled. He gripped the cuff of his jacket and pushed it up past his elbow. Dutton's hand was still on the cuffs. His mouth was half open, ready to bark another order. But the words never came, because what he saw made them die in his throat. On Harold's left forearm, stretching from his wrist nearly to the inside of his elbow, was a tattoo. Large, detailed, unmistakable. The Special Forces crest. The arrowhead. The fighting knife. The 3 lightning bolts. And beneath it, in bold black ink, the motto that every Green Beret carries like a second heartbeat. De oppresso liber. To free the oppressed. Below the crest, his unit designation, 3rd Special Forces Group, and his years, etched in Roman numerals running down the side of his forearm like a timeline carved in skin. But that wasn't what made Dutton go pale. Running alongside the tattoo, cutting through the ink like a river through a valley, was a scar. Long, jagged, raised in white against Harold's dark skin. The kind of scar that doesn't come from a kitchen accident or a childhood fall. The kind that comes from hot metal tearing through flesh at 1,500 feet per second. Shrapnel, the signature of war. Dutton stared. His hand slid off the cuffs. His fingers hung loose at his side like they didn't know where to go anymore. Harold held his arm steady. He didn't need to say anything else. The arm spoke for itself. 28 years of service. Written in ink and sealed in blood. Right there, 6 inches from Dutton's face. But Harold spoke anyway. Not loud, not angry, just clear. 28 years, 3 combat tours, Silver Star, Purple Heart. He paused, let each word settle like a stone dropped into still water. You want to quiz me again, officer? Or are we done? The body camera on Dutton's chest captured everything. The tattoo, the scar, the look on Dutton's face. a man watching the ground disappear beneath his feet. Sergeant Moss had stepped out of her cruiser. She stood 10 feet away. Her hand was over her mouth. Dutton opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it. Tried again. Listen, I was just... I'd like to make a phone call, Harold said. Not a question. A statement. Dutton looked at Moss. Moss gave a small, tight nod. Harold pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a name and pressed call. It rang twice. Raymond, Harold said. It's Harold. I need you. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel Raymond West, retired United States Army, Harold's former commanding officer, the man who had pinned the Silver Star to Harold's chest in a field hospital in Kandahar. And now, a sitting member of the city's Civilian Police Oversight Board. Harold handed the phone to Dutton. It's for you. Dutton took it the way a man takes a letter he already knows contains bad news. He brought it to his ear. Colonel West's voice came through the speaker. Not loud, not shouting. Worse than that. It was the cold, measured tone of a man who had commanded thousands and had zero patience for what he'd just heard. Harold couldn't hear every word, but he heard enough. Officer, I am Colonel Raymond West, retired, United States Army, and current member of the Civilian Police Oversight Board for your jurisdiction. The man standing in front of you served under my command. He is one of the most decorated soldiers I have ever known. I want your badge number, I want your supervisor's name, and I want them in the next 30 seconds. Dutton's face had gone from pale to gray. His mouth moved, but whatever excuse he tried to form collapsed before it reached his lips. The call ended. He stood holding Harold's phone like it had burned him. Behind them, a third vehicle pulled onto the shoulder. A dark sedan. The door opened, and the lieutenant stepped out, called by Moss, who had quietly radioed for a ranking officer minutes ago when she finally accepted that this had gone too far. The lieutenant walked straight to Dutton. Body cam footage, dash cam footage, my office. He turned to Harold. Sir, I am deeply sorry. You are free to go. Harold took his phone back from Dutton's hand. He picked up his VA card from his pocket and held it for a moment. He looked at Dutton, not with rage, not with triumph, with pity. Then he walked to his truck. He picked up the donated coats from the dirt. He closed the tailgate. He gathered the scattered papers from the floor and placed them neatly on the seat. Elijah was already inside, silent, shaking. Harold climbed behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Behind them, in the rear-view mirror, the blue lights were still flashing, but they weren't for Harold anymore. The lieutenant's name was Gerald Crawford. 22 years on the force. He had seen bad stops and sloppy policing, but what he watched on Dutton's body camera that afternoon was something else entirely. He watched it twice. The first time, his face didn't move. The second time, he paused on the frame where Harold Turner lay face down on gravel. A decorated combat veteran, a Silver Star recipient, cheek pressed against dirty stones. Crawford picked up the phone and called the chief's office. By 4 o'clock, Officer Craig Dutton was placed on administrative leave. His badge sat in a plastic tray on Crawford's desk. His service weapon was locked in the department safe. He was escorted out through a side door, like a man removed from a restaurant for causing a scene. Dutton went home and typed his report. His version. The version where Harold was uncooperative, where the search was justified, where the firearm created an officer safety concern. He typed with steady hands. He had shaped stories before. 4 complaints, 4 reports, 4 stamps reading unsubstantiated. He had no reason to believe this time would be different. But this time, there were 3 cameras. Sergeant Brenda Moss gave her written statement the next morning. Small room, tape recorder, a glass of water she never touched. Her hands stayed flat on the table. She chose truth. Dutton had no probable cause. Harold was fully compliant. Dutton's language was racially charged. She witnessed him laugh at Harold's military service. She saw him flick Harold's VA card at his chest and let it fall to the ground. She also stated, slower, quieter, that she had failed to intervene, that she recognized what was happening and said nothing, that she walked to her cruiser when she should have walked forward. Internal Affairs asked her why. Moss was quiet for a long time. Because he told me to wait by the car, and I did. That statement became the first domino. The second domino came 48 hours later. Elijah showed his father the phone footage that night. Harold watched it once in silence, coffee going cold. When it ended, he stared at the wall for a long time. Then he called attorney Vivian Blake, a civil rights lawyer from the veterans community. Sharp, relentless, the kind who didn't take cases for money. She took them for meaning. Blake watched the footage once. No gasp, no head shake. She reached for her legal pad and started writing. Names, dates, statutes. Before the video ended, she had outlined a federal civil rights complaint. She filed a FOIA, request for body camera and dash camera footage. The department acknowledged it, then stalled, cited ongoing internal review. Harold gave his permission. Elijah posted a 90-second clip online. No edits, no filters. Just raw footage. The laugh, the search, Harold forced to the ground, and the quiet sound of a son trying not to cry. 12 hours, 400,000 views. 48 hours, 2 million. The hashtag spread like brush fire. Justice for Harold. Veterans deserve better. Veterans tagged veterans. News accounts reposted with one-line captions. The footage spoke for itself. Dana Caldwell, a local reporter, saw the clip at 6 in the morning. By 9, she sat across from Harold at his kitchen table with a camera crew behind her. Harold agreed to the interview, not for attention. Before the camera rolled, he said one thing Dana would remember forever. If it happened to me, it's happening to people who don't have a colonel on speed dial. That night, the story led the 6 o'clock news. Dutton watched from his couch. The screen showed his own body camera footage, his own voice laughing, his own hands tossing donated coats into the dirt. And Harold's face, calm, still, looking straight through the lens. Dutton turned off the television, but turning off the screen didn't turn off the world. And by morning, the world had made up its mind. The Civilian Police Oversight Board convened an emergency session 3 days after the video went viral. 7 members sat behind a long wooden table in a fluorescent-lit conference room at City Hall. Colonel Raymond West sat at the far left. His back was straight. His face was stone. The board requested Officer Craig Dutton's complete internal affairs file. What arrived was a manila folder thick enough to prop open a door. 4 prior complaints, all racial bias, all from traffic stops on the same stretch of road where Harold Turner had been pulled over. The first complaint was from an elderly black woman named Dorothy Sims. 2 years earlier, Dutton had stopped her for a broken taillight that wasn't broken. He told her the car smelled suspicious. He searched her trunk and found nothing but grocery bags and a folded wheelchair. He let her go without a ticket or an apology. She filed a complaint the next day. It was marked unsubstantiated within 2 weeks. The second was from a young Latino man named Victor Delgado, college student, honor roll, pulled over for driving too slowly in a residential zone. Dutton searched his car, found nothing, and told him to go back where he came from. The complaint disappeared into the system like a coin dropped in deep water. The third and fourth followed the same pattern. Different names, different faces, same officer. Same behavior, same outcome. Filed, ignored, forgotten. Dana Caldwell's investigative team found Dorothy Sims first. She agreed to go on camera. She sat in her living room with her hands folded in her lap and told her story in a voice that shook but never broke. When she finished, she looked directly into the lens and said something that would be replayed on every network in the country. I told them what he did. They wrote it down. And nothing happened. Not one thing. Victor Delgado spoke next, then a third complainant, then a fourth. Each story was different in detail, but identical in shape. The same arrogance, the same fabricated cause, the same humiliation, the same silence from the department afterward. Dana aired the package on a Tuesday evening. By Wednesday morning, the story had gone national. Cable news ran it in heavy rotation. Civil rights organizations issued formal statements. A United States congressman from North Carolina called for a federal review. The pressure was no longer something the department could wait out. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation. Federal prosecutors followed within 48 hours, citing a pattern of conduct that met the threshold for civil rights violations under color of law. Officer Craig Dutton was formally charged with 3 counts. Count 1. Violation of civil rights under color of law. A federal charge, the kind that carries years, not months. Count 2. Illegal search and seizure. Based on the fabricated claim of odor, conducted without consent and without legitimate probable cause. Count 3. Filing a false police report. Dutton's written account of the stop contradicted every second of his own body camera footage. He described Harold as uncooperative and aggressive. The video showed a man with his hands at his sides saying, "I am not resisting." The police union assigned Dutton a defense attorney, a tall man in a gray suit who spoke in careful sentences and used the phrase "good faith judgment call" 11 times during the arraignment. The judge was not persuaded. She reviewed the body camera footage in open court. She reviewed Elijah's phone recording. She read Sergeant Moss's sworn statement line by line. And she reviewed the 4 prior complaints, each one a ghost that the department had tried to bury. Bail was set. Dutton posted it with money borrowed from his brother. He walked out of the courthouse through a crowd of reporters and cameras. He said nothing. His lawyer said no comment 6 times. The cameras followed him to his car. He drove away with his hands tight on the wheel and his eyes straight ahead. 2 days later, Chief Lawrence Powell held a press conference on the steps of the police department. He stood behind a podium with the department seal and read from a prepared statement. He announced Dutton's immediate termination from the force, effective that day. No severance, no pension, no option to resign quietly. Then he announced department-wide reforms, mandatory de-escalation training for all officers, mandatory implicit bias education renewed annually, a complete overhaul of the internal complaints process, no more single reviewer dismissals, no more unsubstantiated stamps without full investigation, and a new early warning system designed to flag officers who accumulated multiple complaints before those complaints became headlines. He looked up from the paper. "I also want to address Mr. Harold Turner directly." He paused. "On behalf of this department, I apologize. What happened to you was wrong. It should not have happened. And we failed in our duty, not just on that day, but in the years of silence that allowed it." Attorney Vivian Blake stood at the back of the room. She had already filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city on Harold's behalf. Not just for financial damages, though those were significant. The suit demanded structural changes with court oversight, independent monitoring, transparent reporting, the kind of reform that doesn't disappear when the cameras leave. The trial lasted 9 days. The defense argued confusion, misjudgment, a stressful situation that escalated beyond intention. They called it a mistake, a lapse, an unfortunate moment. The prosecution played the body camera footage on a screen large enough that every person in the courtroom could see the gravel pressed into Harold Turner's cheek. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty, all 3 counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The courtroom was full. Harold sat in the second row. He wore a dark suit and a quiet expression. Elijah sat beside him. Colonel West sat behind them. The judge addressed Dutton directly. She spoke about the oath he had taken, the badge he had carried, the trust that had been placed in him, and the way he had broken it. Not once, not twice, but over and over, across years, with the full confidence that no one would ever hold him accountable. The sentence: 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised probation upon release, a permanent ban from employment in any law enforcement agency in the United States, and 200 hours of community service to be completed at a veterans service organization. Dutton stood motionless as the sentence was read. His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder. Dutton didn't react. Harold watched from his seat. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He didn't celebrate. He closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then he opened them. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Harold on the steps. Microphones pushed toward his face. Cameras flashed in the afternoon sun. One reporter asked, "Mr. Turner, how do you feel about the verdict?" Harold looked into the camera. His voice was steady, the same voice that had said, "I am not resisting," on the side of a road 3 months earlier. "This isn't about one officer," he said. "This is about every person who's ever been told they don't look like what they are. Every person who's been judged before they opened their mouth. Every veteran, every father, every human being who was made to feel like they didn't belong in their own country." He paused. Justice isn't just a verdict. It's a promise that we'll do better. Then he walked down the steps with his son beside him. They didn't look back. 6 months passed. The headlines faded. The hashtags slowed. The news cycle moved on to the next outrage, the next scandal, the next video that made people stop scrolling for 30 seconds before they kept going. But Harold Turner didn't move on. He moved forward. Veterans Bridge Foundation received more donations in the 3 months following the trial than it had in the previous 5 years combined. Letters arrived from across the country, checks from strangers, offers from corporations. A retired general in Virginia sent a handwritten note that said simply, "Thank you for standing tall when they tried to make you small." Harold used every dollar the way he always had, carefully, purposefully, and for someone other than himself. The foundation expanded into 2 new cities. A second office opened in Atlanta, a third in Richmond, each one staffed by veterans helping veterans. Harold hired people who understood what it meant to come home and find that home didn't recognize you anymore. He was invited to speak at the National Veterans Leadership Conference in Washington. He stood behind a podium in a hotel ballroom filled with 600 people. He didn't use notes. He didn't need them. He talked about service, about sacrifice, about the difference between wearing a uniform and carrying its weight. He talked about the morning he was pulled over on a road he had driven 100 times before. And he talked about what it felt like to lie face down on gravel in the country he had bled for. When he finished, the room stood. The applause lasted almost 2 minutes. Harold stepped back from the podium and buttoned his jacket. His eyes were dry, but his hands trembled, just slightly, as he folded them behind his back. Elijah was in the front row. He didn't clap. He just looked at his father with an expression that held more pride than sound could carry. Elijah had started something of his own. At the middle school where he taught, he launched a program called Know Your Rights. Every other Friday, he sat with his students in a circle and walked them through what to do during a traffic stop, how to speak, where to put your hands, when to stay silent, how to record without escalating. He didn't teach them fear. He taught them preparation, because he knew, better than most, that the distance between a routine stop and a life-changing moment was exactly one wrong assumption. Sergeant Brenda Moss was not charged, but she received a formal reprimand, a permanent mark on her record for failure to intervene. She requested a transfer out of patrol and into the department's training division. 6 months later, she stood in front of a classroom of new recruits. She told them about the morning she watched a fellow officer degrade a man and did nothing. She told them about the silence, about how loud it was, about how it followed her home and sat beside her at the dinner table and woke her up at 3 in the morning. She told them that courage isn't always about stepping into danger. Sometimes it's about stepping toward a colleague and saying, "Stop." The recruits listened. Whether they would remember was another question. But Moss showed up every week and told the story again, because she believed that if one person in that room carried it with them onto the street, then the worst morning of her career would have meant something. Harold and Colonel West met for dinner on a quiet Tuesday evening, a small restaurant near Fort Bragg. White tablecloth, 2 glasses of water, the kind of meal where most of the conversation happens in the pauses. West told Harold he was proud of him. Harold shook his head. "I just did what you taught me, sir. Stay calm, tell the truth, let the facts speak." West smiled. "I taught you tactics, Harold. The character, that was already yours." They finished their meal without saying much else. Some things don't need words. They just need presence. Justice isn't only about punishing the person who caused the harm. It's about building a world where that harm is harder to do in the first place. And that starts, every single time, with refusing to stay silent. And if this one hit you the way it hit me, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Hit that like button. And if you're not subscribed yet, come on, you already know. We tell stories like this every single week, and I promise you, you don't want to miss the next one. Because respect is not a privilege, it's a right. Okay, but like, real talk? Don't ever, ever judge someone by what they look like. You have no idea what someone's carrying inside. And staying calm when someone's trying to break you? That's not being weak. That's power. Also, if you see wrong happening and say nothing, nah, you're part of the problem. Speak up. Always. Okay, but like, real talk? Don't ever, ever judge someone by what they look like. You have no idea what someone's carrying inside. And staying calm when someone's trying to break you? That's not being weak. That's power. Also, if you see wrong happening and say nothing, nah, you're part of the problem. Speak up. Always.